So welcome here tonight on behalf of the New Zealand Centre for Sustainable Cities. As you can tell, I'm a bit croaky, so I'm going to keep words to a minimum. But it's really good to see you all, and this represents a good level of interest in public transport and transport issues generally in the Wellington region. So I'm delighted you're here. New Zealand Centre for Sustainable Cities is a group of researchers centred at the University of Otago, Wellington, but people like me at Victoria University are part of that wider network of researchers, and it includes people like NIWA, who are doing work on the effects of cities on air and water quality, and so on and so on. So you can read more about the New Zealand Centre for Sustainable Cities on our website. Lisa up the back is our development manager, and she can tell you more if you've got a burning interest. So tonight, this is an opportunity to talk about, in a reasonably intelligent, well-informed discussion, to talk about options for transport in Wellington. And what we've done, and with the particular help of Jean Beetham, where's Jean gone? Over there, like letting people in again. Good on you, Jean. Is pull together a panel of people who've got something useful to say about transport in Wellington. And I hope we can raise the level of information about this really important stuff, this really important decision or set of decisions about where we go in terms of transport in Wellington. So just to kick things off, there's an extra addition to the program, and James Richardson is going to talk in a few minutes, just for 2 or 3 minutes, about an architect's point of view on this issue. Now, Philippa Howden-Chapman, my partner, and I were judges recently in a New Zealand Institute of Architects event at the School of Architecture, where a whole lot of students from different centres, not just Wellington, came together and talked about how Wellington's transport issues could be addressed based on the idea of a hub in the centre city, and trying to think outside the square. And we were very impressed by a number of the presentations, but tonight we've just got one for you. So the presentation is from James and his 2 colleagues, so he can explain a bit more about that. But I'd very much welcome James. He's a PhD student at School of Architecture here in Wellington. So over to him for a couple of minutes.
Great. Thanks very much, Rafe. I want to start off by thinking about what transport's actually all about. And it's about connecting the places that we live, work, play, and learn. And I think transport as an issue is changing. It's changing from an issue of moving people from one place to another to an issue of access. It's changing from physical access to actually digital access. And we need to think about creating spaces that are not just specialized but actually are more generic. And if we look at our current model of live, work, play, we can say that our place of living is within maybe walking distance of just a residential neighborhood, and it's quite disconnected from our places of work or our places of learning. A matrix model might have us place those 3, live, work, play, all in the same house perhaps, but that's probably not a model that we're all comfortable with. So we took a look at how could we actually move our place of work a little bit closer such that it's somewhere within walking distance or cycling distance, and create a network of hubs that connects those functions together. To start this kind of questioning, we have to ask ourselves, what is the human condition of a walking catchment? How far do people walk? Well, about a 20-minute walk is sort of a 1 kilometer radius. This is around Courtney Place, but of course it could be anywhere. And looked at how that would appear as a series of suburban hubs within which we'd need to be able to place live, work, play services. Within that, we could actually break it up a bit further and take a look at what that 5-minute walk might look like, which is about 400 meters. You needed to also think about this bicycle catchment idea, which is a little bit bigger, and this is assuming a 20 kilometer an hour sort of biking speed. And if we take a look at the current bicycle network, you'll notice that it's pretty patchy and disconnected. So we took a look at ways of connecting those bits and pieces together. If we zoom in on one of those hubs, we wanted to explore the idea of space and how we can make it more generic and flexible. And perhaps we could, instead of saying one building is specialized for banking or for learning, for example, this room, maybe be able to expand a structure out so that it meets different functions and actually gets bigger through the course of the day to meet those different needs. And I'll just lastly think about this concept of a cell phone, a pretty now generic piece of technology that can do almost anything. Well, why can't our rooms do the same thing? This room right here is really designed to do one thing, be a lecture room. But maybe we need to think deeper about how we shape our walls, how we shape our structures so that they're more flexible. Thanks very much.
Thanks, James. Good thought starters. Yeah. So I like the creativity of that. And moving on, we've now got 4 more conventional, I dare say it, presentations. So the aim of these is to get people thinking in different ways. So they're all from different perspectives. And we start with Jane Davis, who's the General Manager of Strategy and Community Engagement at Greater Wellington, and brings a wealth of experience to this topic. So she's speaking on the core findings of the Wellington Public Transport Spine Study, and I'll introduce the others as we go through as well. But we've got the order of Jane, then Brent, then Tom Pettit, then Tony Randall, Brent Efford, wherever he is, there. And so we're going to take 10 minutes from each, and I've got an active timekeeper at the front here. So the purpose of that is not to contain them, but just to give everybody a shot at getting different points of view on this complex issue across. And then at the end, there'll be an opportunity for discussion and questions. So very much welcome, Jane.
Kia ora tātou. It's great actually to be here to be able to present the Regional Council's finding from the studies. I'd like to first though acknowledge our study partners who are in the room tonight. We've got NZTA here in the room, obviously taking this project, this study and the outcomes of it as seriously as we are. 10 minutes isn't long enough to present fully a study that has been a very complex, very comprehensive and evidence-based study, but I'll do my best. Okay, so just to start with the study purpose, I'm going to go through these very quickly. So the study purpose, we're looking for a high-quality, high-frequency public transport system going through the centre of Wellington City. It's a key action out of our Narangata Airport Corridor Plan. That corridor plan is a couple of years old now. It was very comprehensive, well thought through plan that Greater Wellington worked on through the Regional Transport Committee, but with Transit, as it was in those days, in NZTA and Wellington City. The corridor plan is an integral part of Wellington City's urban growth plan, so they're closely aligned. The growth spine sits alongside the growth spine that Wellington City has identified for its future. And coming out of the corridor plan isn't just this public transport project, but the RONS projects, Roads of National Significance projects that are sitting within Wellington City are also a core part of delivering corridor improvements. And the Basin Reserve project, for example, is a core part of delivering high quality, high frequency public transport, because we've seen real life evidence, but we know that in the future that particular part of the spine is going to be a real problem for passenger transport. So the study area, we focused between the railway station and the hospital. We've extended the study through the process south, and I'll touch on that in a little bit as to why. We looked at going north as well, and again I'll come back to that in a minute. But the growth spine, the growth spine of Wellington City and the public transport spine, as I said, are closely linked. We've very much looked at the major issues in the city being between the railway station and the hospital, and then Kilburnie. So the options, we started with 80 plus options. So the study really looked at anything and everything. So we started with anything that is possible, quite creative in terms of the list and the sort of ideas that were considered in the first instance. Through some criteria, we reduced that down to a short list, or a medium list of different options in terms of the mode of travel, the types of vehicles that would operate, but also the routes that could be used. So while we had assumed that the Golden Mile through the central city was probably going to be the key to the spine, we had to test that to make sure that it was actually true. So we tested a whole lot of different options, including the terrace. We looked at the waterfront and a few other options in terms of the routes that we could have that were possible. Once we got down to a medium list, and the projects or the options that sort of were knocked off from the very long list to the medium list were knocked off pretty obviously when we actually started looking at it in detail. When we got down to the medium list, we used a number of criteria to reduce the most feasible options down to the 3 most feasible. And sorry, just going back to that, I'll just go back to what we did is we compared the 3 options with what we call a base case. So what would happen if we did nothing? Now, it's not quite true that if we did nothing, because the Regional Council's recently undertaken a fairly comprehensive bus review. So we assumed the outcomes of that bus review were in play, and we also assumed some of the RONS projects were in play. So the base case was as it would be in the future in terms of what we've planned to date. So the short list, I'm sure you'll be familiar with this: bus priority, bus rapid transit and light rail transit. And I won't go through the slide, but that's sort of broadly the description of the 3 options that we looked at in quite some detail. You'll notice that all 3 options had an electric option in terms of the types of vehicles that might be used, and that was actually really important for the councils, that we made sure that whatever was going to be considered could be electric, hybrid or diesel in the future. So these are the routes of the 3 options that we looked at. You'll see that the BRT, the bus rapid transit and the light rail options have the same routes. The bus priority measure has a slightly different route, and that's really to do with how the road is configured and how the tunnels are configured through Mount Victoria. Okay, just sort of talking about the extensions to the north, because we were challenged through the project and actually ahead of the project about the scope of the project, and there's a lot of questions of why we actually just started at the railway station in particular. What we did through the process is that we did test the 3 shortlisted options going north. We spent some time modelling and analysing the opportunities for, say, extending it to Johnsonville, with the view to, if it looked as though the option might be feasible to Johnsonville, we would look at extending the testing through to the Hutt. It became quite clear through the evidence that we were gathering and the analysis that was done that there would be very few benefits from extending any of those 3 shortlisted options up to Johnsonville, for example. We've got very high capacity heavy rail going to Johnsonville now. So in terms of attracting more public transport users of any significant number to justify the extra cost, we just couldn't make it work. So in terms of that sort of feasibility, it didn't work. The cost itself to convert the rail line, or the current rail line, or to replace or duplicate the rail line were really significant. It's not just a matter of, say, putting a light rail service onto an existing heavy rail, the existing heavy rail Johnsonville line. There would be a lot of work having to be done with the tunnels and with the platforms, and having just been through that process to bring the Matangi into our service on the Johnsonville line, we know how much that costs, and it's millions of dollars. So the costs are real, and we just couldn't make any of those 3 options work going to Johnsonville. And then, having done that process, we didn't bother having a detailed look at going to the Hutt either. I think it's really important to emphasise that we do have a very high capacity, high frequency service already serving the north into Wellington City CBD with our heavy rail, and complemented with an existing bus service. So extensions to the south were also looked at. So just going back to the Narangti Corridor Plan, through that process we recognised that the regional hospital was a key destination and origin of a lot of trips, which is why the corridor plan did direct us in the first instance to look between the railway station and the hospital. But we did want to test the feasibility of some of the more expensive options, for example light rail in particular, if we were to extend the routes that we were looking at further south, and also to the east, which is where Wellington City is planning some intensification, residential intensification and other activities. So having looked at the south, what we found that actually there is a lot of potential to grow public transport mode share. In terms of the percentages, at the moment what we're finding is that the public transport mode share for Johnsonville, for example, is around 70%, which is incredibly high. Where we're sitting at the moment in the south, we're only looking at about 30 to 40% public transport mode share. So that's the share of all travel to work. So clearly there's a lot of potential for growing public transport mode share. And so what we've done is, through the investigations, we've proved that actually there's some real gains and real benefits to be had for marginally more costs by extending the spine effectively. The linking to the east was actually really challenging, so geographically it's really challenging. We've got a major hill in the way, which has to be effectively tunnelled or gone over. We've got a really significant green open space that we can't touch. I mean, that was in terms of the impact on heritage and recreation and other values that Wellington City people hold dear. We couldn't actually go through the reserve, so we're looking at tunnelling or using existing roads. So we looked at 3 tunnel options and again looked at them in some detail in terms of feasibility. We looked at the benefits and all the various costs and impacts, and where we settled on was a Mount Victoria tunnel, duplicating Mount Victoria through this by the current state highway for light rail. But if we use the existing Mount Victoria tunnel plus the tunnel that's planned, the duplicated tunnel that's planned through the Roads of National Significance program, then that would be the most cheap. It would also deliver the most benefits. And just to let you know the sort of things that we looked at, for example, the Zoo to Kilburnie tunnel, which would have cost about the same as what a new tunnel alongside the current state highway tunnel would cost, would add significant travel time and cost to passengers. So from a feasibility point of view, that really discounted itself. So we looked at a number of, we tested the various options through a number of criteria, including the physical the feasibility. We looked at the costs and we looked at all the benefits and the costs in terms of not just financial costs but environmental costs. And I've just been given a note that I'm almost out of time, so I'm just going to go through these really, really quickly. The answers or the results from the study were quite significant in terms of the costs and the benefits for light rail versus the other 2. So light rail, no matter which way you cut it, whether you assume that there's another tunnel required or not, is significantly more expensive than the bus priority and the bus rapid transit. And clearly through our, I might just quickly go through that, clearly through our analysis, the benefits that we would gain for the 3 options, from those, clearly the bus rapid transit outdid the other 2. So for those who promote light rail as the answer, and I'd have to say that there were quite a few people as part of our study group that were very keen on light rail at the beginning of this process, both in terms of the costs and the benefits, it is outdone by bus rapid transit. So at the moment what we've done is the study has been delivered to us. For the Regional Transport Committee has got the responsibility of making a decision on which is the best model. The Regional Transport Committee considered the study when it was reported back, looked at the results and have endorsed bus rapid transit as at this stage their preferred model. But we are talking to the community, so the committee has called for submissions and people's views on the three options, and those submissions are coming in at the moment. They'll close off at the end of September, and in early December we're hoping that a subcommittee of that committee will hear submissions and report back to the Regional Transport Committee with a recommendation as to which option to take forward. So that is a really, really, really quick presentation on the study. As I said, it's probably way too quick to do the study justice and to give you really the details in terms of how the study worked and the results of it. And I look forward to the questions. Thank you.
Well, that was a whirlwind tour. So, yeah, perhaps we can go back to some of those slides at question time just to pick up on some of the numbers and some of the issues around those. So now I'd like to turn to Brent Effort. Brent, maybe you could find your slide while I'm introducing you. Brent's, well, most well known, I suppose, as an advocate of light rail and someone who's followed trams and light rail and public transport options for many years in the Wellington context, and has run a very interesting Transaction is the name of the group. It's a sort of online group that shares information about various public transport options, and it's been an informative group to see coming over the airwaves. I guess Brent has the ability to draw on a lot of experience, like Jane, over the years of thinking about these issues and really debating the fine grain of them. So he's not only got a sense of the strategic issues here, but some of the detail of these controversial topics. So very welcome.
Right, thank you, Rafe. And I'm also looking through the other end of the telescope, I think. The public transport spine study has little credibility technically, and if it was implemented would leave the Greater Wellington public transport system permanently crippled with its current broken spine. This isn't just my jaundiced opinion. Internationally, Professor Peter Newman is one of the most prolific researchers into urbanism and sustainability. He literally wrote the book, in fact several of them, on sustainable cities and reducing car dependence, and has the practical experience of being the father of Perth's enormously successful electric rail system. He spoke at a Centre for Sustainable Cities seminar here in Wellington only a few weeks ago, and later made this email comment. He said a lot more than that, none of it complimentary, but it won't fit on the slide. Before we start, just a clarification that we're only talking about a steel spine, which should be the backbone of a network in which buses deliver most of the trips, even if not most of the transport. Designed according to the principles of NZTA Research Paper 396. Unlike Tony, we don't suggest that our mode is the only one needed for a complete network. The spine study is notable for what is missing from its terms of reference. Sustainability and climate change mitigation and adaptation, any understanding of the relationship between transport mode choice and urban livability, any concept that the public transport spine should be comparable to the state highway spine in terms of reach and continuity, any intention to provide better modal choice at a time when car driving is levelling off, and any sense of capitalising on Wellington's embedded renewable energy as a transport fuel. But most egregious of all is the definition of the public transport spine in a way that ignores the vast bulk of the Greater Wellington population. The Wellington public transport spine apparently runs from the railway station to the hospital. The study team later found reasons to extend it southeast, on a separate route moreover, but not north. The proverbial Martian or anyone else unfamiliar with Wellington would, on reading the terms of reference, conclude that the Wellington region was configured a bit like this. In fact, of course, Greater Wellington is a mid-sized metropolis of nearly 500,000 with a very high commuting focus on its compact CBD, which houses about 50% of the jobs, as well as most of the entertainment, tertiary education, cultural and tourist facilities. And the CBD is also the region's fastest growing population centre. To the south of the CBD lie the regional hospital and airport and other generators of region-wide travel. This confused concept drawing issued with the terms of reference certainly trivialises the relationship between the CBD bit of the spine and the vast bulk of the region lying to the north. The rail system is the trunk for 75% of the metro population, the folk who live north of Thorndon. Rail carries 70% of the total public transport passenger kilometres, but only needs 37% of the operating subsidy, and it covers 92% of the State Highway 1 and 2 transport corridor. The spine is steel by any common sense measure. Through the CBD operation of spine services is the practice or ambition of every urban transport system in the world, from the London Underground to the average small city bus system. It is the reason for promoting the $2.9 billion Auckland City Rail link. It applied to all of the cities I visited in my 2003 study tour and every other city I have visited. Collecting passengers along the line and then dumping all of them at a stub terminal on the edge of the CBD is the least efficient and economical way of operating any public transport service. We have world worst practice. The desire for a continuous steel spine has been around for a long time. Let's have a very quick look. Started in 1878. Things got serious in 1959 when the Ministry of Works designed a rail subway to Newtown, intended to be built before the urban motorway. In 1963, a consultant's report shortened the line and placed the terminus at Courtenay Place. It was deemed in 1966 to require some urgency, and the underground line remained in the district plan into the 1970s. Note the quote, 50 years ago, DeLu Cather perceived what is now denied. In the 1990s, modern trams, or light rail, were back in fashion. Lobby group Transport 2000 proposed this to extend the Johnsonville line to the airport. And this got wide publicity and commercial support at the time. This sparked an investigation by the Regional Council, which produced a 1993 plan to convert the electric rail system to tram-train and extend it south. And that was fleshed out in a further report in 1995. The 1999 Regional Land Transport Strategy envisaged extensive deployment of tram-train throughout the region in the 2004 to 19 period. Then, as usual, nothing happened. In the 21st century, we are told that the need for a completed rail spine no longer exists. We've just heard some of it. And that the broken spine, in other words this, delivers a better public transport system than this. So if the study team was handed a poison chalice with such reality-denying terms of reference, how did it address the challenge of producing a sensible report? Let's mark the map showing their light rail scenario. And already I see I'm caught out by the fonts installed on this particular computer. First, what is meant to be a big cross at the railway station because there is no connection to the rail spine. In fact, the means of interchange is ignored, implying that the current congested and time-wasting arrangement is all that's intended. But it's not all bad. The Golden Mile is confirmed as the main route. This provides better access, more opportunities for higher public transport priority and pedestrianisation, and will attract the most passengers. So a tick, if you could see it, for that. And another tick for putting both tracks on the western side of the median in the northern section of Lambton Quay. But once we get to the Basin Reserve, it all turns to custard. A second route just to get to Kilbirnie is a big cost add. Looks blatantly like an attempt to create a bad look for light rail, and postulates that State Highway 1 expansion will have spin-off benefits for public transport. Professor Newman obviously spotted that. So another cross. But even if there was a case for a second line, the congested basin reserve area is quite the wrong place for a junction. This looks like another flyover justification to me, another cross. Going along the unnecessary Kilburnie branch, it gets worse. 2 new tunnels for the double track. This almost doubles the cost of the whole light rail scenario. And why? Because it is claimed, despite all the overseas experience and the trolleybus wires in other Wellington tunnels, that you can't have overhead wires in a road tunnel. Another cross. So into the widened Ruahine Street, essentially a motorway, the very worst route for LRT or even for BRT, with no online transit-oriented development potential and little online passenger potential. It will create a wider corridor biting further into the town belt and will conflict with traffic on-off State Highway 1 at several points, creating extra costs for mitigation. Another cross. Into Wellington Road and Kilburnie Crescent, convoluted and therefore slow route with a probable need for property purchase further increasing cost. Another cross. And what is missing? A depot for the line. It is unable to use the existing multiple unit depot, and of course if it is not linked it can't. So the light rail line will need a depot of about this size. Another huge cost add. Exactly where you would locate that in the corridor is not addressed. Add the missed opportunities between the hospital and Kilburnie and we get 2 out of 10. Hardly a pass mark for a report which is claimed to be authoritative. Finally, if we don't have light rail, we miss out on a whole lot more. We miss out on a big modal switch to public transport. Just providing through service helps. When the Newlands bus started running through to Courtney Place, its patronage increased by 60%. But being on rail helps a lot more. It's real on steel. In Karlsruhe, Germany, connecting city tram and suburban railway lines boosted patronage by hundreds of % on some lines. US cities have recorded big transit patronage increases when converting from express bus to light rail. We miss out on the chance to further pedestrianise parts of the Golden Mile. The Manners Mall fiasco is a reminder that buses and pedestrians have to be kept apart. But trams and pedestrians share space in most tram cities. We miss out on productivity. Far fewer vehicles are needed for modern tram services, with per passenger kilometre operating costs 2/3 that of bus. We miss out on easy access. Roll-on, roll-off convenience with modern rail-guided vehicles is taken for granted. We miss out on the opportunity to ride the wind using local renewable electricity, showcasing Wellington's sustainability credentials to the world. And in spite of what has been said, electric bus technology, if it's not to be trolley buses, is not here yet as far as deployment for public transport is concerned. And we miss out on the urban design opportunities which can mix uncongested, high-density public transport with human-friendly green environment. And we miss out on a range of economic benefits which I know Tom will cover. But to finish, a quick commercial. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much, Brent. Now we have Tom Pettit, who's a Master of Public Policy student at Victoria University of Wellington. He's not actually one of my students, but he's at the School of Government, another branch of the institution, and graduating this spring, he hopes. So he's thoroughly reanalysed the public transport spine study and in the past year, and he's looked at international evidence. So I think he brings an interesting and fresh perspective to this. So very welcome, Tom, and good luck.
Thanks very much, Rafe. And I did want to thank the Centre and everyone else for coming along, because it is a very important discussion to have. But I do want to qualify that I'm not here to sell you anything, any particular option. I just want to cover 3 quick issues. I think Brent did a pretty adequate job of taking apart the study, but you'll see 1 or 2 criticisms I have in there in general. But the quick overview of what I want to talk about are the basics of the differences between the modes and the economic case for it in the sense of the costs and benefits. The basic issues is that both are good modes, but there are major differences. For example, bus rapid transit, to carry the amount of capacity needed for the Wellington spine, would need multiple lanes, and there's just not that much space there. That's the only reason I think light rail is prioritized, and it's the main driver of the economic differences I'll talk about later. But the other issue is that the proposed plan for Wellington won't meet the International Bus Rapid Transit Standard, and it's not so much a semantic issue about whether or not it's going to meet this standard, whether you can call it bus rapid transit. It's about whether you can get all of the benefits that are sold as part of it. For example, there's 4 cardinal rules that you should not break when it comes to bus rapid transit. You really do not want the bus to run in shared lanes. The Northern Auckland Expressway is a great example of a good bus rapid transit implementation, but you really wouldn't want it in a tight space like Wellington City. There's other consideration. Bus has an advantage in that its buses can leave the corridor that you've built, although it may compromise reliability because they can get caught up in congestion elsewhere. The other alternative is small buses can come into the lanes, but need passing lanes to be effective. So again, you're talking about taking more lanes away from general traffic, and that's just not ideal with an already congested area. The main issue with bus, though, is even with the same service in the same area, international research tends to show that ridership for light rail is just better. Brent actually had a few examples of that, so I won't go into great detail. But the fact is, for the capacity needed for the Wellington spine, it requires only 1 lane dedicated. It can have a grassy right-of-way, so you might see Courtney Place, Lambden Key, or any place where the light rail would run turn into a grassy median rather than a bit of an urban blight with a concrete busway. The main compelling features for me, though, are the stronger economic influences and the better ridership that drives it. Obviously, those economic influences are set off against the costs. I personally believe that the spine study costs are vastly overestimated, and it's driven primarily by an unnecessary tunnel that adds $380 million to the cost and 3.2 kilometers of unnecessary track. By their own per kilometer measure, the Greater Wellington spine study would indicate a sensible route would give you a cost of $375 million, whereas buses get a free tunnel, so you aren't even comparing apples to apples for this study. A proper route would look something like this. It would go over Constable Street instead of going through Mount Victoria or involving demolishing any houses. But the thing that matters with Constable Street is Greater Wellington insists that Constable Street is not an option, despite the fact that the Heritage Trams used Constable Street for more than 40 years. They say it's too slow in the ACOM study, and I'll point out here that ACOM didn't say anything other than it was too slow. But when challenged on this issue, they published in the Dom Post this quote, which basically says homes need to be demolished to use Constable Street. Now, that's a pretty important point because, again, $600 million is at stake. But fundamentally, what I'm going to say is that Constable Street is 4 lanes and 2 sidewalks, and it can't be turned into this, 4 lanes and 2 sidewalks, just with parking turned into light rail without demolishing houses. But more than that, there's other creative ways to solve the issue. You could send a tram on Mine Street through the neighborhoods. You could divert 1 lane of traffic. Whatever the case, there's other options that would not involve spending $600 million on a needless tunnel. Aside from that, there's 170 cities around the world with less than 150,000 people that have light rail that's working. This is per Peter Newman during his visit. They've found a way to make it work, and that primarily involves a cost-effective way to build a route. So when you look at this route, it's driven by the benefits, it's driven by cheap costs, but in addition to that, 60% of future Wellington population growth over the next 30 years is going to be along this corridor. With 60% of population in there, it's hard to see where benefits, or at least ridership, would not come into play, which brings me to the meat of what I did this year. The benefits are pretty much the only thing less defensible than the spine study costs in this study. I want to point out that this isn't the author's fault. The New Zealand Transit Agency Economic Evaluation Manual is decades behind the times in some spots and years behind the times in others. New Zealand Transit Agency knows this. They're updating it. I give them great credit for that. But why are we making major investments when you know that your economic evaluation is flat wrong? This combines with a major problem in the spine study in that ridership projections were totally unrealistic, a clear demand modeling failure. There's two components that led to this. One was that by policy, they excluded 8,000 potential riders from the north, but on top of that, with 60% of future Wellington residents going into the transport spine, they model almost no increase in ridership over 30 years. It's just not possible. And on top of that, Peter Newman came to town, read the entire study, and he just said it in the most simple terms possible. It doesn't do justice to rail. I'll quickly refresh you on what they said, although Jane helpfully put up what the study's exact figures showed. Bus rapid transit was around 100 million in benefits. Light rail was around 50 million in benefits, pitted against the respective costs in the study. Whereas my year is spent completely reanalyzing the spine study based on international best practice for economic evaluation. I used traffic modeling from GWRC and some parts of the New Zealand Transit Agency economic evaluation manual that were quite well grounded. I do want to put a professor of mine on the spot who will remain nameless, who told me, he assured me at the beginning of the year nobody would be interested and I wouldn't have undue scrutiny on my work. The research I used had to deal with dollars actually changing hands rather than surveys. It had to be from a world leader in transportation research, one way or another. And the big changes it drove are pretty simple. I have decent ridership growth in my study of about 16% instead of 0% in the first 7 years, extending beyond that, although it tapers off. A value of time that's based on wages instead of a value of time based on surveys, a perceptual discount rate, and I calculated property value increases with the wonderful assistance of a friend of mine from the School of Geography. Now, I do want to point out that astute observers will have noticed these changes do affect all modes. The value of time will make even roading investments more valuable, for example. But the difference with rail is that you're creating demand that takes cars and buses off the roads to alleviate congestion, rather than creating demand that adds more cars and buses into the same downstream network, as the Dom Post noted in a recent article. If you make the basin better, it doesn't matter if you don't improve the center of the city, you're just moving the congestion somewhere else. So when you correct all of this, what you end up with is a completely different economic evaluation. My analysis using international numbers shows that total time savings and car ownership savings for light rail actually amount to about $2 billion, with around $712 million collection for rates and fares, and property value benefits of around $2.5 billion. And actually, the property value benefits, I'll note, are based on a Motu economic study of the rail in Auckland. So I don't really see how those could be wrong because that's based on New Zealand information. Either way, the benefit cost ratio increases for light rail to around 5, and it does increase for bus. And bus it's an important option because it is slightly cheaper. But the question is, if you can spend a little more and get a lot more back, why not? People always ask me, what is it so different between bus and rail that drives this? And the thing is, when you're building a rail, you're spending money to make money based on the fact that it can attract a whole lot more riders. Whether it's the fixed guideway or the more comfort, I can't tell you why. I just know that rail systems drive a lot more ridership. As a result of this, you can fund the construction through interesting ways like land value capture and the like. The end result is the travel time benefits are immense, the economic benefits through property value are equally compelling. And yes, the bus does save time and generate economic benefits. It's just not as much, and it doesn't have as compelling property benefits. So personally, I would follow the money and build a tram for Wellington. But the reality is, I'm not here to tell you what Wellington should buy. I'm just telling you that taking another look before you spend $250 million is a pretty good idea if international information out there is conflicting. Thank you.
Thanks. I always feel slightly woozy after looking at those presentations. You know, what's going to loom at me next? Anyway, Tony Randall is a member of the reference group for the Wellington Public Transport Spine Study. He's a Feel free to come up, Tony. He's a public transit advocate from Johnsonville and has been involved in the public transport debate in Wellington for many years. He'll look at the spine study and the merits of the bus rapid transit system for Wellington City, and is our last speaker, so, you know, lucky last. Thank you, Tony.
So, thank you very much for taking the time and making an interest to have a look at this. So I'm, first of all I have to say, I'm not a professional transport planner. A few people ask me this. I call myself a public transport advocate, and I've been been involved with the debate since 2002, and I was invited by the Regional Council to be, as was Brent and some others, to be a member of the Spine Study Reference Group. So it's an important decision, and I want to give you some other ideas. So as I'm sure Tom would agree, it's about making people think before they decide. So I want to cover bus rapid transit versus light rail. This is like a great debate. I still remember the Microsoft versus Apple debates in my profession of IT, and it's very much the same thing. So passionate, and it's great, but it's also one of those decisions where there isn't a consensus, and that's why it makes it really hard to find the right way forward. We have to make a decision. I want to outline why I believe that bus rapid transit is right for the growth spine. Some issues I have with the study, and such like. So first of all, let's just say on the table, light rail is superior to on-street bus. Absolutely, I'd agree with that. But bus rapid transit is not on-street bus. There are actually many different forms of bus rapid transit, from fully grade separated, as in the Auckland's Northern Busway, in Brisbane Southeast and Northern Busways, to CBD compatible systems. Fully separated bus rapid transit is not an option, unless we're going to build an elevated one or something. The spine study recommends a lighter form of bus rapid transit. The key thing for me about bus rapid transit is that it needs a dedicated corridor the whole way, with passing, as Tom pointed out. There are many successful examples, and I want to just quickly run through one, which is the Metro Rapid solution in Los Angeles. The problem they faced in central Los Angeles was that a slow bus service, getting slower, and that 50% of the time the bus was stopped when it was travelling. You know, bit of a contradiction in terms. So they started the Metro Rapid program with 2 bus rapid transit lines on Wilshire-Whitaker Boulevard and Ventura Boulevard. And they look a bit like that. Ventura is along the top. You can pick up a few places, but the CBD is in the middle of downtown, and it goes out to Santa Monica, which is I have been to, but not by bus. What they did is a tailored solution, and they put in all these different things: frequent service, bus signal priority, headway-based scheduling, simple route layout, less frequent stops, integrate a whole package of things. High-capacity buses, as recommended for Wellington. Interestingly, they didn't put dedicated lanes the whole way, or off-fare payment. That was going to come later. They introduced it, and the result was reduced passenger travel times, 29%, 30%. Increased ridership, significantly increased ridership. And of the new riders, a third of the new ridership increase were new riders. Okay, that is, they didn't used to take the bus. So, really important to understand. This is an equivalent. This goes today. You can go there and ride it today, and it's successful. And it doesn't even have a completely dedicated bus corridor. But the key point is investing in buses will lift the service. Key highlights to me is they made major investment in intelligent traffic systems to keep the buses on time. They talk to the lights. and they deliver high capacity. Wilshire Whittaker Boulevard, and these are weekday ridership levels. Before there was 63,000 people a day riding there, and they lifted it to 84,000. Look at that, 20,000 more riders per day on a 2-lane busway. Ventura Boulevard, similar. We get those levels in Wellington, we're doing fine. I think the bus rapid transit is right for the growth spine, and I think the study is a good study. I think it's been open, it's been consulted widely, it's taken a long time, and taken longer than they wanted to. It's been done by professional transport planners. The data is all published there so that people such as Tom can go and pull it apart and make their case against it. I don't agree with all the studies, but as a feasibility study, I think the process is robust. And I'm not sure if repeating it's going to come out with another option, another outcome. The spine study shows that bus rapid transit is superior in the most important measure, patronage growth. Okay? It's the only option that actually lifts patronage as Wellington becomes more congested. And there's another important point. It's the fairest service. Because after all, this is we're not picking which type of America's Cup yacht we want to race today. This is a public transport service. It's for the public. And it needs to take people from where they live to where they go, to where they want to go. And the light rail option is great for some and bad for others. Light rail has winners and losers, whereas bus rapid transit is, because it's more seamless and more direct, benefits everybody. And the spine study shows why bus rapid transit has turned up to be superior in the analysis. It has much lower levels of transfer. Because the main question that needs to be answered by each option is, how do people who still take the bus get to work? I mean, it's great if you live in Kilburnie. I mean, look, you get light rail, bus rapid transit right there, okay? The key question, though, is where people live in Miramar, Island Bay, Karori, and Johnsonville. We're still busing. Although, are we busing to a station and then getting on a rail vehicle and railing? Because, Wellington's not a good place to interchange. And I think the Regional Council found that out in the bus review. In economic terms, it has measured benefits. And I'd love to see your way you do yours. It's cool. I like to pull them apart. Maybe I can pull your pull apart. And we can argue, how much more the costs are, but even if it costs the same, bus rapid transit's better. Even if it costs the same. So in my opinion, though, there are two major gaps in the spine study. Sorry, Jane. It doesn't provide, and I agree with Brent, and I agree with Tom, it doesn't provide rapid transit to North Wellington, even though North Wellington is the largest, most rapidly growing area of Wellington. It has all the greenfields growth. It has the high density, medium density growth area in Johnsonville itself, and it's got a large amount of infill. And the other area doesn't provide sufficient capacity for all the public transport services on the corridor, which for a strategic study is not good. The spine is broken, and this study doesn't fix it. Okay. The overarching Airport Tauranga study defines the spine as the growth, that growth is to be concentrated on the spine from Johnsonville through the CBD to Newtown to Kilburnie. Okay. This is the picture of it, and you can see the blue line that goes from Johnsonville through the CBD and down to Kilburnie. That's the growth spine that the spine study was supposed to provide great public transport across. The spine study says, while patronage is sufficient, it was discounted because of these sort of reasons. The rail service provides fast access to Wellington. It's unlikely converting it to bus rapid transit and light rail would result in substantial time benefits. Well, even Metlink doesn't agree. This is rail from Johnsonville, bus from Johnsonville, leaves about the same time. Bus is 6 minutes quicker. Scheduled today, every day. And that's the problem that light rail has, and that's the problem that rail has. It's got to keep stopping at the stations, even if you don't want to get off. So the spine study's real reason is that it was eliminated from the terms of reference by the Regional Council. They wouldn't consider any option that impacted on existing infrastructure. It would only be considered as a longer-term option beyond the life of any recently upgraded infrastructure. In other words, the study doesn't fix the spine because the Regional Council didn't want to examine the Johnsonville rail line. Yeah, I'll just finish that. So the other thing is about the capacity, and I'll just skip forward. They have this alternate spine thing, pushing buses off from North Wellington. There are a couple of alternatives I'll throw up. One is to put the southbound buses off onto Victoria Street. But my favourite option is to put a bus tunnel in, put buses underground in the choke point. And so we can talk about this if you want. In the end, though, I think bus rapid transit is a superior service because it provides more direct journeys to more people. It supports express and all-stop services. It's less vulnerable to single points of failure. It can be implemented in phases, providing the benefits of rapid transit earlier than light rail, and it costs less, leaving more public transport funding available for other improvements. And we can't keep relitigating this. We've debated this for a damn decade. And meanwhile, the Regional Council's plan for buses has been no increase in subsidies, no investment in the service, and just keep raising the fares. And now we know that it's not working. Bus patronage has fallen 10% in the last 2 years. We are doing 1 million trips a year less now on our bus service. It's less than 2005-06. After a decade of neglect, our public transport service is dying while we dither about what medicine to take. And so we should decide now and move on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone, all the contributors. Now it's time for questions and discussion. So I can see some hands up already. We've got about 10 minutes. This hand was up first, up there in the middle. Can you address your questions to, Mark. Can you address your question to a particular speaker if possible, or specify if you want everyone to?
Yeah, this question is for Tony. Just out of curiosity, you use LA as an example of where bus rapid transit was effective. What does Wellington have in common with LA?
So I think what it has in common is it has a mainline street through the CBD where it's very hard to put dedicated busways, and there's lots of traffic and lots of demand for bus services. And so that's what it's got in common. Wilshire Boulevard has buses with 1 lane each way. So does the Golden Mile.
Yeah.
I have a question for Jane. Did the Regional Council consider modelling a base case scenario option without the ROMs? to see what the impact would be on demand for public transport?
Unfortunately, I've got my modeller here, and he's just told me, yes, we did. We did a sensitivity test. We did a number of sensitivity tests, and that was one of them. But as I said...
Has that been published? Because I haven't seen it anywhere. It's in the without the wrongs, because I thought that...
Yeah. Can I just re-emphasise, though, that without separating traffic at the basin, it's going to be very hard to get a reliable bus or light rail service through that choke point. I mean, you could stop the vehicles, obviously, but that's going to add quite significant costs in terms of disbenefits. I mean, if you don't like cars, that's fine, but I mean, the reality is that people in Wellington use their cars quite legitimately, and freight obviously uses
so what have
trucks.
traffic volumes been doing lately?
Traffic volumes...
They've been growing as expected?
no, they're not growing as we had modelled them a few years ago.
No.
No. But we do still have significant road traffic.
Road that moves most people? No.
Thanks, Julian, and thanks for the response, Jane. Yeah, from up the back there, Paul.
Which question to ask? I think just to pick up on that point, I'm just interested to hear Tom's perspective and any of the others, because Tom, I think you showed on yours that congestion through the basin would actually disappear based on your modelling, and that's without a flyover, I understand. So I'm interested in the other perspectives on
That's technically their modelling, because I use their...
Tom, do you want to come up and then we can capture it on the big screen for that?
So you're right, yes. It did show that congestion disappeared around the basin based on the additional riders that light rail would pull in. But that's based on their traffic modeling, so I can't really, give you a confidence interval for how much I trust the traffic modeling. Outside of the flyover, I don't really want to talk about the RONs, to be honest, because it's too political. I know that's funny talking about this particular issue, but I'm much more confident about public transport than I am about.
Yeah, there was one here and then you. Yeah.
My question is to Jane. Why does this line study not go to the airport, given that the NZTA has been banging on about getting roads, unwanted roads through our city and out to the airport? Unwanted roads.
We did look at the extending to the airport. There aren't any more, I mean, the benefits for the cost of actually extending to the airport, whether it's light rail, bus rapid transit, or even the bus priority, there weren't going to be the benefits to justify the cost. So the cost benefit, ratio got even smaller when you look at to the airport.
Would it be because the amount of traffic going there is quite small?
No, it's more about the catchment for the passenger transport. So it's and the cost of putting the infrastructure in. So for the additional passengers that you would attract, there just wasn't the benefits. Yeah, for the cost.
They're extending the airport.
Okay. We have the next question here and then over there. Yeah.
First, I want to comment on Tony's presentation, and then I might speak a little more broadly than that.
Can you speak up?
Yeah. First to Tony, I appreciate your perspective as a Johnsonville resident. I was just out there today, actually looking around, and a number of people have said to me when I've tried to look at transferring bus trips to rail, that please don't do that in Johnsonville because the train is slow and because the line is circuitous and it takes a long route and it stops too many times a job. I appreciate that, and it's the only line in Wellington region where that happens. The Hutt Valley line and the Pettit line are much faster than the roads and the bus services, and therefore...
So, what's your question?
I just want to say that, yes, I appreciate the need for bus rapid transit in the Johnstonville-Newlands corridor down to the station, but not the spine. The rest of the spine down from the station to the airport and down to Newtown and elsewhere in Wellington and the rest of Wellington City. I think that light rail is the way to go, and I'm looking at putting in, as a public-private partnership, 4 lines of light rail that would be Glory, Newtown to Kilburnie, Taito to Kilburnie Airport, and then straight down Courtney Place, down Adelaide
Okay, thank you for that. But I think we've got to cut that off at this point. There was a question from Russell over here. Russell.
Yes. Actually, Ralph, I'd like to interrupt you here at this point.
Daryl.
I don't want to, thank you. I don't want to ask questions. Before any more people leave, I'd like to get the feeling of everybody here as to how they feel about the presentations that we've just heard. I believe, and I think everybody, most of the people here do too, that your second and third speakers were very strong and produced a lot of evidence.
Sorry, Daryl, is this a question?
No, I'm not going to ask you a question.
Well, I'd like to chip to Russell, thank you. Russell, the floor is yours. Russell? Thank you.
Okay. It's a question of Jane, please. Wellington City Council, in its climate change policy statement, says that all its activities should come under the lens of climate change. What priority did the Wellington Regional Council give to climate change in its spine study?
The Regional Council is very focused on climate change, and I don't know whether we actually included climate change consideration. Yeah, so it was one of our considerations one of our criteria that we used to reduce the long list down to the medium list. And as I said, all modes that we consider, all options for the vehicles that could run on any of those three options, has provision for electric, if electric is going to be the most sustainable and most appropriate in the future. Now,
Trolley or just electric?
We didn't specify. We don't know what the future is going to be, and so we're not. Whatever's going to be built is not going to be built tomorrow. We know that there's a lot of investment around the world in terms of the technology for vehicles, for bus vehicles and for other vehicles. So we haven't cut off any options for the future, but just to re-emphasise, our council and our councillors are very focused on issues like climate change. So that will be a consideration in the design when we get into the detailed design, but certainly it has been as part of the study.
There was a deficit of questions over on this side. Could we have a question, please, rather than a statement?
Yeah. Why this obsession with the Golden Mile when, in fact, you could run the buses down to the railway station along Jerboys Quay and bring them back up Featherston Street if safety was an issue? Why this obsession with the Golden Mile?
I assume that's directed at me. Yep. We looked at all the different other options. So obviously we looked at the Golden Mile because that's the existing route where the public transport goes. So we looked at where people want to get off and want to get on the public transport. And the Golden Mile is actually the most appropriate, or the most sort of, it's where most people work. What we found when we modelled the alternative options like the Quays and even Featherston Street, you lost lots of patronage because people aren't prepared to, one, cross the Quays, which is always going to be busy, so that's a barrier, and they're not prepared to do the same walk. So what we found is we maximised the patronage attraction, or the attraction of whatever the three modes were, by continuing to use the Golden Mile. We even looked at the terrace, for example.
Is that the same area that's on the west side of the Quays?
Yeah, well remember you've got to run both ways.
Yeah, but you can run back up Featherston Street.
Yeah, and so the other thing too is we looked at legibility, so how easy it is for people to find where they need to catch and to get off buses or light rail. So yeah, we absolutely tested all those options, as I said in the beginning. We would try to think of everything that possibly could be possible, and we tested all those options.
Thanks, Jane. So there are a question from Peter Barrett over here.
Yes, it's a question to Jane. Comparing costs with the three different types. First of all, are those simply construction costs of the system, or do they include operating costs? And if they do include operating costs, over what time period? Because you're putting in a facility that will last for 50 years. And I guess there's a question as to how long should you have to pay it off over?
Yep. I had a slide which I probably quickly jumped over. So there's a mix of both capital costs and operational costs. So the capital costs are by far the most significant part of it, and the capital cost of light rail, the light rail option was significantly higher at 938 million than say the bus priority, which was 59 million. in terms of the operation costs, the bus priority would cost about the same as it costs us today to run the buses. So it would be comparable to what we pay now, and what, you know, those obviously are going to compound in the future. Bus rapid transit is slightly cheaper than what we run at the moment. So if we did bus rapid transit now, we would be saving about $6 million a year. That's a yearly cost, isn't it? Yep. And light rail was going to cost a little bit more at 89, so within the ballpark. 88 is the current cost, so 89.
Okay, Sue Kedgley had a question. Sue. Okay. Get away.
I just wondered whether you did think that it was a major flaw in our public transport system, that the railway station is located at the edge of our city rather than downtown as in most cities, and whether you think it's a major flaw in your study that you don't deal or address the 75% of the population who live north of the railway station.
No, I don't think it was a flaw in the study. If Wellington was going to be designed again, maybe you would design it differently. I don't know. I mean, that's just pure speculation. I mean, as I said, we looked really seriously at the north. Even when we did the Narrangata Airport Corridor Plan, we looked to the north. We do have a very good train service, heavy rail service at the moment that services those populations, drops them into the end of the CBD. But most people's journey to work is a walk. And some people will scooter, but most people walk to where they need to go. There aren't a lot of journeys that go through the CBD and then to the south, we've found, during the peak times. So, it's definitely not a flaw of the study. And we had a thought on that too. Yeah, we probably disagree a little bit. But, you know, we did seriously look at it. We did, and, you know, the truth is that, and this is probably going to some of Tony's points, the region has invested quite significant amounts in our heavy rail system in the last couple of years. That investment is a 30-year investment. You know, we don't live in utopia. We do actually have to deal with what we've got in reality. We have got a now almost not quite world class, but getting there train service that is relatively new in terms of the rolling stock, and the work that Kiwi Rail's doing on the lines is upgrading it. So, you know, we can't undo that. We can't undo our investment, and we can't just walk away from it, which I think Tony will probably challenge us to do.
So, I just would like to make a comment. I mean, I think it's wrong to be uninformed, and I think it was wrong of the study not to have checked what the benefits of rapid transit options would be going to the north. They can give a rubbish benefit cost ratio, but I'd like to know the travel times, I'd like to know the patronage lift, I'd like to know all these things, and the Regional Council has systematically avoided looking at light rail and bus rapid transit from Johnsonville through to Kilburnie. Managed to avoid, spent a decade looking at this study and managed to avoid modelling it. Now, I commuted from Johnsonville to Newtown for 5.5 years. And I can tell you the reason why people only walk from the railway station is because the bus service is rubbish. And an hour and 10 minutes each way is not the way I have to travel. I had to buy a car.
Okay, Tom.
I just want to say something really quick on the same topic. There was actually a great thesis out of the Victoria School of Architecture done 2 years ago that indicated every single neighborhood along the transport spine had about 20% unmet demand for public transport. That's people who are taking their cars but don't want to. So, I mean, how you ignore those people, that's your choice.
That can make a big difference to how you value the benefits of a public transport option. Okay, I've got one here and then the last one there.
My question was to Jane. In light of what we've heard today, are you still sticking with this 900 million cost? That's my first question. Do you want to answer that, or shall I apply them all together?
Can you just ask the two together now and keep it brief?
The second one, if you absolutely insist on a segregated tunnel for light rail, did you consider at all using the bus tunnel, which was originally up until 1964 a tram tunnel?
Yep. So in terms of the first point, the 900 odd million, that number will be refined in time if we need it to be refined. But even if we haven't got it exactly right, rough order costs just put light rail so much more expensive than the alternative. So, you know, in spite of what Brent said, yeah. And we know that number was always going to be...
1990s studies too. I mean, you're absorbing all that.
Look, we know that this was going to be challenged. So, you know, we did do our homework through the study, and I encourage every one of you who is really interested to look at detail at the study. So, the second... and make a submission, clearly, yes. The second question about the existing tunnel, yes, we did look at that. There's some issues with it. Yeah, there are some issues with it. Well, if you want to, if we're talking about light rail through the tunnel, there's some issues with linking on to Moxham Avenue down the other end, and some property issues. Possibly could be resolved, but they're quite challenging. There's some issues with the tunnel itself. It's a single tunnel, so we're going to have to somehow manage some holding pattern for the light rail service either side. You've got some quite steep... Yeah, but you've got some quite steep slopes, and remember the buses are a lot shorter than a light rail. We're talking about, you know, a reasonably decent size or length of light rail to make it feasible. We couldn't make it work. We did try it. We couldn't make it work.
Okay, thanks for that, Jane. Last question from here.
I have a question for Jane, or maybe her modeler. Let's see. When you put up the pictures, the bus rapid transit and the light rail do have exactly the same route. And I mean, I've looked at hundreds of studies of light rail around the world and meta-analyses on it, and I've never ever seen ridership increases of less than 10%. I mean, the average is usually higher than that. And how come, if they have exactly the same route, how could they have different ridership levels when people generally like light rail more than bus rapid transit around the world?
Yeah, Nick will fill in the gaps, or correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that it really comes down to the transfers. So the light rail system is going to obviously directly serve those who live or work directly on the line, but that's not most people who would use it. So there is going to have to be a complementary bus service feeding into the light rail. The benefit of the bus rapid transit is those vehicles could actually run off the bus rapid transit spine. And so, for example, if you're thinking about the service directly to the south down to Island Bay, you could have the same vehicles moving off the bus rapid transit line and continuing and serving the Island Bay area, for example. So you're actually cutting out quite a significant number of transfers, and that's where I think most of the differences in terms of patronage come from.
Okay, I'd like to call the discussion off at this point. I think we've been very well served by all four speakers. Maybe not this one. So thank you very much for coming along and posing your questions. And I think that's done a lot to actually illuminate and clarify some of these tricky issues. And I don't know that there are any right answers on some of these things, but if you've got a view, put in a submission and have some faith in the democratic process, and let's articulate our own personal views of this. I don't think we can necessarily take what the authorities say as given on this issue. There's lots of assumptions to be questioned and thought about. So use your intelligence and use your discretion and put in a good submission. And thank you for coming along tonight. Thank you.